All right, welcome to the podcast, Rethink Vertical. A little bit different episode today. Special guest, Kinsley Jordan, who is going to be the UAS Cluster Initiative's new state director. Kinsley, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Super excited to be here. It's been a long time coming in watching the awesomeness that you guys have done, that the cluster's been able to do, and it's been really exciting and super excited to be a guest, not only here, but also getting ready to come on with you guys.
Right, we get to kill two birds with one stone. We get to introduce you to the public to you, and then also pick your brain a little bit about just industry, some of the challenges out there, just some of your general thoughts, having been involved in aviation for a long time, like you have. So probably really helpful since you're going to be running the cluster within the state, and all these future relationships you're going to be building and strategizing to how the cluster can support the industry. I think it'd be great for folks to know, how you ended up here. Number one, and kind of where you come from. So you want to give us your background?
Yeah, that takes a moment to think back. It feels like just yesterday, but before you know, it's been 15, 20 years. So really my story and exposure to aviation started on the plains of Kansas on a farm in central Kansas, just north of Hutchinson, Kansas. Always saw the B-1s, and at that time, a couple of F-4s flying over, and eventually the B-2. And as a kid, I just thought, man, I so desired to do that. I want to do that. So being from a small farm town, not many people try to go to a military academy. So for whatever reason, I wanted to go to the Naval Academy, being a Kansas farm boy that had never seen the ocean. Somebody asked me that, said, what, have you ever seen the ocean? Why do you want to go to the Navy? I said, no, I've never seen the ocean.
Right.
You ever been to a lake? No, actually, no. So maybe you should think about the Air Force Academy. So, long journey going through, to apply to the Air Force Academy. Didn't get in my first time. Had to go to a prep school to keep going after that journey, and that goal, and, was able to get in. After taking the ACT 8 times, which was awesome, but eventually got in. Eventually, even a guy like me was able to get in. Loved going to the Air Force Academy. Like I said, it was a long time goal of doing that, on the way to be a pilot, Air Force pilot. So graduated from the Air Force Academy in 2008, and went to pilot training at Vance Air Force Base. My family is from Kansas. I met my beautiful bride, Brooke, who is actually from Enid, Oklahoma also. So it made settling down in Oklahoma very easy. Her family was from there, and fell in love with Oklahoma, and Kansas was close. And at that time, deployments were pretty prevalent. So wanted to be close for family, and got it to fly an intelligence surveillance aircraft. And after 15 years of being an instructor, and many combat tours, and also getting to help with stand-up pilot training transformation for the Air Force, which really focused on how do you utilize technology to train pilots more efficient, more effective, to be more capable, just overall airmen, to handle various changing situations and circumstances. And in the process of getting that opportunity to be an instructor, worked for the Pentagon as a innovation strategist for the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, helping to solve some of the innovation challenges in the Air Force, which really what it came down to was helping to build an innovation ecosystem, helping people to solve their own problem, helping bases to solve their own problem. And as you know, and I know, that comes in with finding capabilities. Then when you find great capabilities, you got to find a way to fund them. And when you got to not only fund them short term for the development, but also fund them long term for the capability, keeping the capability. So it was really awesome. And that also led me to working with some venture capital companies for dual use technology, for military defense development. So over the last, I had a very non-standard Air Force military career.
So non-typical pilot.
End of your path. But it was just so interesting to me. I mean, building, and not that innovation is new to the military by any means at all. I mean, you can look back at the creation of the microwave and integration of internet. And I mean, it's not that it's new, but the mindset of grassroots integration, of allowing the people to solve their problems, and creating that pathway for them to do it in a very rapid sense, and utilizing venture capital dollars or federal dollars, state dollars, to be able to do that. That was a fairly new concept. So I really loved that idea of exposing companies, helping companies to get exposed to dollars that could really help them bring their capability and their invention, their creation to the public and to defense. And in the process of that, UAV, UAS started really advanced air mobility, emerging air mobility. I worked closely with AFWorks, and they had a section called Agility Prime, which is focused on how do we train electric vertical takeoff landing pilots. If the capability is coming, how do we train aircrew to safely fly aircraft that are going to be autonomous and need less hands and stick
Right.
control and more mental management, data management, if you will. And that in conjunction with having been an instructor, thinking about the processes of airspace mitigation and capability, that led perfectly into UAV UAS. And for the last couple of years, I've
Right.
been in the UAV UAS space, really helping both general aviation and commercial aviation to understand that this wave of UAS, advanced air mobility, is coming. We're not stopping it. It's not like we would
Right.
want to stop it, but we can't be so beholden to our old ways and our comfortable ways to just continue doing things the way we've always done them. So that led me to getting to know you in multiple
Right.
facets, and I was always so curious because you were everywhere. You and the cluster, you guys were
Yeah.
everywhere. So it was really really cool to see what the cluster has been doing, the impact that it's had in Oklahoma, the impact it's had in this region, even nationally. I want to be
Right.
part of that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it brings up a good point. You talk about, and we've chatted about this a little bit before, this concept of a cluster, which is, I mean, let's be honest, it's a little bit of an enigma for most folks, right? It's like, what is an innovation cluster? Like, what does that even
Hmm.
mean? It's a very, roots are from Europe, so it's a very European concept, and the idea is really to get multiple organizations, both state, federal, local authorities, industry, universities, research and development, all to kind of come together to help solve problems collaboratively, right? That's really the
Hmm.
whole point of a cluster. And so, you know, that that is why it feels like we are everywhere all the time,
Yeah.
and why I am so thankful to have you coming on board to be the face of this cluster project in the state, because you really kind of have to be. I mean, you do have to be a lot of places at once, because you never quite know what level of support that
Right.
organization or that project or program might need, especially when you think about it from that kind of entrepreneurial standpoint, which is really what the U.S. Cluster Initiative is thinking about, is like, how do we not only build the ecosystem, but how do we do that through entrepreneurial support in a
Yeah.
specific industry and now in a specific state. So
Yeah.
maybe that's a good
Yeah.
segue to, you've been learning, right, over the last couple of weeks,
Yeah.
what the U.S. Cluster Initiative does, kind of what levels of support we provide, kind of, who are the players in the ecosystem that we have relationships with,
Yeah.
and then kind of with your background, just, throw you a little curveball here. What's your first impression of a what's already going on in the state, and then B, where are some areas that maybe the cluster can be most helpful to help continue to grow it?
Yeah. I love curveballs. It's great.
Yeah.
During election season, this is perfect. I feel like
Right, exactly. Yeah.
that's perfect. Honestly, I have used what the cluster and what the state of Oklahoma has been doing as a shining example in just about every time I talk to somebody outside of the state, whether it's at the national level, whether it's DC level, or whether it's state to state. I was actually talking to a friend of mine who took over as the aviation director at Kansas State, K-State Salina. Just catching up, he had taken over, but
Hmm.
we end up talking about the future of aviation for general and commercial aviation, and I didn't even bring it up. True, you can talk to him. You can. I didn't bring it up at all. He brought up the
Right.
conversation of UAV, UAS, and the integration
Right.
between the two. And every time something along the lines of growing an ecosystem, helping entrepreneurs, I always use Oklahoma and what has happened here with advanced emerging air mobility as the example. In honestly, I think we need to be at the lighthouse in the middle of the nation, letting people know
Hmm.
and continuing to stand on top of the hills that we have to say,
Right.
you need to get here. I wish there was an even more vocal way of letting the nation know this is where you need to be. Now, whether or not the systems as we're growing them can support that massive of an influx of people coming in. I think that's the exciting part is that
Mm-hmm.
when you have that ability and you see as much growth and it takes people are taking notice on a national scale, you know, especially with some of these people that I don't want to call them legacy UAV UAS, but you know, there are some states that they were the first to the trough. They were the first ones saying, "Hey, we're going to plant our flag in the ground," and they have recognized what's taking place here. And I think it's really cool because that's by the intentional actions of being of the cluster, of the state, of the
Mm-hmm.
multiple different entrepreneurial, the startup companies who have made the investment of saying, "Hey, we believe in what's happening in Oklahoma," to the universities, Oklahoma State University, Oklahoma University. I mean, they're making intentional investments to say we're going to do this, and it's the coolest thing. I can't brag
Yeah.
enough about what the state has done, and what the cluster has been able to do because people are taking notice. So I use that as an example. I oftentimes when I talk to anybody about what growing an ecosystem looks like, because there is such a strong foundation of it here and now in
Right.
Oklahoma. And to your
Yeah.
point of what that looks like, entrepreneurial support. Well, I'll pause there because that's kind of a whole nother conversation. But
Yeah, no,
um,
let's jump into that in just a minute. I was going to say that I think one of the things that I've learned over the past few years, especially about building ecosystems, is it's really a two-part process, right? There's that initial building of momentum around an idea or an industry or concept that Oklahoma has been um, well, internally especially been really good at. I think we do need some work on the branding outside of the state, and I know that's been noted in a couple of conversations that we do need to be better about letting folks outside the state know what's going on in a more like strategic way. Um, but the honest truth is that the folks within the state are doing the work, right? They're in the
yeah,
weeds doing the work that needs to be done, and so there's that initial like building a momentum, which we've done. Now comes the part, if you look at, you know, the recent Tech Hubs designation, and now as of last week, the Tech Hubs grant opportunity that Pulse Innovation Labs recently was awarded $51 million by the EDA. More to come on what that looks like technically, but now comes the work of actually taking momentum and moving it into like very specific action, right? And I think
right.
that's where we are. So from an ecosystem building perspective, now it's like, oh, we've told a story. Now we actually have to deliver on that
Yeah,
story in very
yeah,
meaningful ways, and it takes a whole different skill set to do that, right?
yeah,
So that'll be interesting to see how that all plays out.
yeah, yeah.
You know,
It it absolutely does take multiple um it does take multiple skill sets, but one of the things that I think is also really important in the process is that communication of not only do people recognize it, but how does that directly apply to them, and what is it? How do we use that to continue growing? Oftentimes, people can see information; they can see that, hey, yes, you know, things are happening. We do need to make changes, but until there's an action item, or until there's like that takeaway step of how does this impact me, and what is it that I need to do to help that next step, or what do I need to do? Maybe it does apply, maybe it doesn't apply, but I think sometimes we don't ask that question of what is my action item from here? Is there
mm.
something I need to do, or is this more informational in this growth process? And that I think that does perfectly lead to. I'll let you set up the question. It sounded like you had another question on that about the ecosystem support. Or
Yeah, so that leads us right into the question of, from your standpoint, or maybe from the cluster's eventual standpoint, you've worked with startups, you've worked with entrepreneurs before in the past, thinking about how they can then bring their technology to the military. How do you think about entrepreneurial support? Like, what are the key things that the industry and the ecosystem need to be thinking about to support entrepreneurs in this space?
oh man, how long do you have? We'll keep it keep it short.
Yeah,
There's the only thing I
you
can.
got
I guess I give.
13 minutes. No, I'm just
Yeah,
kidding.
I give this.
Just kidding.
I know. I guess give this caveat. I guess is all I a lot of times people it seems like people think, well, there's this magical process, and there is our experiences that allow us to make the decisions and growth. All I know is my experiences of what I've seen worked at times, and then you put those pieces together. So there's a couple of things that really come to mind of how those ecosystems and what the entrepreneurial support has been on the defense side, but not necessarily just the defense side. I more mean the startup companies that were working with defense. And I think
Right.
that's one of the hardest aspects because many times there's not a run like your runway that you have for that company is very short. It's SIBR based
Hmm.
or maybe private
Right.
equity based, and you're looking at a year, maybe 3 years tops. But it's not been palmed. It's not in the congressional budget. Yeah, maybe somebody's connected to congressional ad, but it's very short term. So the intentionality of helping those small companies, exactly like we're doing with a cluster, has to be very intentional. And it can't be hey, it can't be a mindset of hey, maybe we try this and maybe this works. It has to be more, we're going to intentionally try this. And here's the expectation we have from it. And if it fails, that's okay. But we have to know
Hmm.
what our plan B and what our next steps are. So that being said, there's a couple of pieces that I've seen that have been really important to that. One is understanding um, that development needs to be based on the actual problem, not just a symptom of the problem. So when you're thinking about bringing solutions, oftentimes we're bringing solutions to symptoms, but we're not actually tackling the sickness. And sometimes the sickness is um, that that the process has gotten very convoluted and communication just needs to be streamlined, or maybe the decision hierarchy, or the connectivity of a business to this problem stakeholder needs to be much more direct instead of, subcontract to subcontract to the prime contract
Hmm.
holder and then back to sometimes, oftentimes we get so focused on fixing these symptoms and putting band-aids on something that's actually a gashing wound that
Right.
somebody needs to
Right.
step back and say, hold on, I think we're tackling the wrong thing. We need to stop with a symptom when we need to focus on the problem. What is the actual problem? Or maybe it's not a problem when you're talking about entrepreneurial support. Maybe it's a capability. Hey, what is the capability that you're actually wanting to connect? And does this future path, what pathway do you need to be able to do that? The second thing
Right.
is once you identify what that problem or what that capability is, there has to be a champion. In this case, for flying terms, I'll use there has to be a pilot.
Mm.
You have to have some system that is driving this capability and has the vision for it. And I've seen it several times as the venture capital companies that I worked with were assessing kind of the pitches that they got. Is it was shocking to me that they weren't just assessing the technology; they were actually assessing more the leadership team's ability to communicate their capability. And
Hmm.
there were many portfolios that we looked at in this process and realized the technology was awesome, but unfortunately, the leadership team didn't probably have the capacity to clearly articulate the value of this technology, and the investment wasn't made. So it's that champion, somebody in that ecosystem support needs to have the ability to be able to look at it and really champion that effort across, whether it's the leadership team or whether it's helping that company get the appropriate leadership team. Because some people are like, some engineers are great engineers, some people are
Hmm.
great programmers, and they have no desire to be the leader of a company. That you know what that takes, and you know what it
Right.
takes to communicate with people. Um, so that support of who's going to be the champion, who's going to be the person to be this voice for the capability is really, really important. And if there's not a champion or a pilot, if you will, somebody leading that capability to success for the growth, then we need to find one. And then the
Yeah.
vehicle itself, um, what is the vehicle? What is the capability that is needing to get across the finish line? What is whose hands are we trying to get this into? Do the people who need this the most, do they know that they need this? Uh,
Mm.
is there a market for it, or is this just a seemingly great idea? And we have to have the willingness to say, I don't think this is ready to fly yet, and just being honest because I think from what I've my experience, what I've seen is many times startup companies or entrepreneurs have been hurt because nobody told them the truth as soon as the truth was known. Nobody told them,
Mm.
"Hey, you need to wait a year on this," or "You really need to get connected to this organization," or "You really need to plug in more to these innovation ecosystem meetings that are happening because you're kind of going tangential and you're going to need the support of this group." So having those
Yeah.
honest conversations, which you know and I know, sometimes they're not fun, but man, I would much rather be told now than later that this something's not going to work, or we need to change
Yeah.
the pathway. And then the last piece is, if you have a great pilot to lead the vehicle and the capability, um, all aircraft hopefully take off fly and land at some point. And oftentimes, especially in larger organizations, and when you're talking state dollars and state development and federal development, there's a lot of momentum about getting it off the ground and getting it airborne and helping it to fly. There's very little discussion about the natural progression that this thing that's in the air eventually has to come down. Eventually, there's going to be a technology or capability to replace it. Eventually, you're going to have a competitor that maybe has a better product. So, what does it look like to help things fly, help entrepreneurs get on their feet, but then have a transition plan and helping them to understand unless you want to be in this in the long term, there's a real likelihood that somebody's going to want to buy your technology. There's a real likelihood that maybe this grows farther and faster than you have a desire to support it. What does that look like? Because you don't want something to succeed for 3 years and then just disappear. It doesn't help the state. It doesn't help. It doesn't help other entrepreneurs. It doesn't help the ecosystem for companies to, flashbang exist. They do phenomenal and then they just disappear unless they're being incorporated into companies that are ready to assimilate them. So for me, that's a lot of that is those are critical roles to what ecosystem support looks like, because those are the areas I've seen most failures happen. And I don't say failure is a bad thing. We know in innovation, failure is necessary. It's how you grow. It's what you do with those failures. It's what you do with those missteps. But those are the aspects in each of these areas that I've seen kind of be catastrophic to a company. If they don't have that outlook, if they don't have that avenue. And again, those aren't the only keys, I promise you, but those are the ones that I've seen that really come to mind that are important to keep in mind.
Yeah, I want to maybe touch on a couple of comments that you made. One that I really liked. One is what you just talked about is intentionality. I think, um, I spent most of my professional career not in a space where startups were a thing, right? Traditional aviation is generally dominated by federal governments and large prime contractors and OEMs, right?
Mm,
there's no room for startups, right? It's too expensive. So having been kind of dropped into the UAS AM space, 3 or 4 years ago, it was kind of it was a new area for me. But this idea of intentionality, where we're looking at startups and like startup entrepreneurial support, what they need. Um, there's this tendency for regions, right? It's a regional innovation cluster. You're thinking about like how do you create an environment for startups to thrive, and folks immediately go to like the soft, I won't say soft skills, but like the easier things, right? Which is like,
mm,
we're going to provide them a space. We're going to provide them free office space. We're going to provide them just a general level of support, right? Which are all great things.
yeah.
But that is not the reason that Silicon Valley is what Silicon Valley is, right? It's not because people get free office space. It's because companies grew, became successful, and those entrepreneurs provided that experience and
Yeah.
expertise back to the folks behind them building companies, or
Yeah.
folks within those companies spun off and built new companies and had that experience. And so until you have that level of intentional experience that can
Yeah.
go to one previous founder or current founder can go to another founder and say, hey, this is how you solve your accounting issue. This is how you get your product to market. Hey, you don't have a product market fit. You have no business building this company until you figure out how you have product market fit,
Right.
right? But
Right.
what's happening now is everybody wants to be nice, right? Which I totally get. It's hard to tell people the truth, and also because entrepreneurs for years have been told the startup story of you're going to be told no 1,000 times and
Yeah.
you just keep plugging away, right? Which has value, but there's also value in just honestly taking the feedback that you're getting from whoever is mentoring you or a venture
Right.
capital firm when they say you don't have product market fit. This business model will not succeed. Like, so it's a little, there's a conundrum, right? They're like, I want to be the next Uber, and Uber was told thousands of times they don't have a business, and look where they are now, right?
Right. Right.
I want to be
Right.
them, and it's like, well, there's one of them, but there's thousands of other companies that were successful that
Right.
figured those things out, right? So that's a little bit of a challenge, I think, for entrepreneurs because it's so well publicized that it's hard to build a company. And so people are going to tell you your idea sucks all the time, and you should just ignore it and keep plowing
Right.
forward. It's like, well, yes and no,
Right.
not
Right.
necessarily. Sometimes you just have an idea. It's not really a company. It's not really a
Right.
product, and that's tough. It's a tough
Yeah.
thing to do.
Well, that I really feel like that's almost predicated on the understanding, which I didn't have that as an understanding until I saw it time and time again. And then you find the commonalities of these moments and exposures where you're like, oh my gosh, that's why. But I feel like that's predicated on the fact that people hear, you're going to be told you're going to be told no 1,000 times. You're going to hear, a lot of people are going to tell you you don't have something. That statement is predicated on the fact that when you're told no, there's value in understanding why people are telling you no.
Right. Yeah.
It is most of the time not because they have a vengeance against you and they hate you.
Right. Right.
That's not the case. Most of the time people are saying, hey, this isn't going to work out of wanting to be able to help, wanting you to be able to understand, hey, have you really thought about this? And there's those that when you get a no, it doesn't mean it's not a variant of what you're talking about isn't going to work in the future, although that may be true. But it may just be like more of the mindset that you have going into this isn't quite, it's not going to pan out like you think it is. Have you considered this instead? And one of the, unfortunately heard this story several times, but I've actually heard this from companies' mouths and their leaders and CEOs of saying, they get told no, and they say, well, you just don't understand. You don't have a vision for what we have. Um, that inside itself should raise several red flags. If you're saying this about your product, or if people are saying this, and you're saying, "Well, you just don't understand." Well, there's a reason they don't understand because you didn't communicate it well enough, and the reason why they're telling no is because they didn't understand what you're trying to communicate, and maybe or maybe you did communicate it, but they're just still concerned. I think of those little wind up cars that when
Right.
as they go, they hit the wall, and sometimes they'll stop and they'll pivot around, and then they go another direction. That's You do have to have the momentum. There are going to be those times when you get told no, and you do have to be willing to pivot. But I think that is the value of what a cluster and innovation ecosystem does is it allows you to still be surrounded by people that if you do hit a wall and you turn to pivot and go another direction, you're going to run into somebody else who has advice or has help to be able to help you say, hey, I realize you guys pivoted from the different market. What about connecting with these other people? Because in your new aspect and understanding what you need to do in your company, there'll be a great connection for you. But
Right.
I agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more emphatically. It is very
Yeah.
intentional. It's intentional.
Yeah.
And they do have to, it's not for the faint of heart, for sure. But you
Yeah.
have to be humble and willing to accept that feedback and not take it personally because the real success is staying with it and getting a variant or variable of your product off the ground if people agree and those mentors say, yeah, this is a great idea, you should definitely do it. Because when you have the support of those mentors, that goes a massive distance.
Right. For sure. Well, yeah. Look, I know we could talk about this for hours,
Yes.
but I think it like kind of leads to this idea of there's a lot of opportunity for the cluster to really support, this emerging aviation ecosystem that is has quite a bit of momentum, right, in the
Hmm.
state. So, um, yeah, I mean, I'm excited to kind of see where things go. I'm excited to for you to jump in the deep end here and start
Yeah.
to kind of figure out vision and strategy for the cluster for the coming years um, and ultimately, right, to um, understand how to become intentional, right,
Yeah.
and what folks really need from the cluster to be
Yeah.
successful, rather than just in name, right, actually providing that level of support, whether it's access to capital or mentorship or all the other a myriad of things that the cluster is focused on. So
Yeah.
I personally am super grateful to have you coming on board, and I'm grateful you're already in Oklahoma and you already have some established relationships in the network, and that we could just build on that.
Yeah.
And yeah, just and also glad that folks got to hear from you and see you
Yeah.
on the podcast before you start showing up in their email box or at their events
Yeah.
and peppering them with questions and
Yeah. Absolutely.
Really look
And
forward to it.
the one I couldn't be more excited one to be joining and for the opportunity, and for getting to know what you and your companies do for anybody who's listening,
Mhm.
or support if you're a mentor, if you work in the state aspect, whether you work at a national federal aspect. I truly look forward to it. I love hearing the stories of where people are and what they're excited about. And I just encourage anybody to consider this if you're thinking about reaching out, if you have thought about reaching out. Don't assume that whatever your question, concern, thought, idea is doesn't apply to us. Let's discover that
Mhm.
together.
Right.
If
Yeah.
you think in your mind, I wonder if they're the people. Oh, please call, reach
Right.
out to us, and we'll discover that together. Because we may not know, but man, that's one of the things I've admired so much about you, Craig, and the team is that we may not have the connections. In fact, there's a good chance we don't have the answer for you, but we do have the connections. Sorry, that's what
Mm.
I meant to say is we may not have
Yeah.
the answer. We may not, but I don't believe in the hard no.
Right.
Those pivots are really important. Hey, I can't help you with that, but I do know the person. Let me set up an introductory call, or let us get connected. And that's a part of what we do.
Yeah.
Is drawing those connections. So don't write yourself off if you think, hey, I'm more general aviation focused, or hey, I'm more aerospace development focused.
Right.
I don't think UAS cluster may not be the right fit. It may not, but I'd just say let's discover that together
Right.
and find out.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good point. We're all going to be. I mean, right now everything's very sectorized, right? UAS, advanced mobility, traditional aviation.
Yeah,
Mark my words. In 5 years, it will just be aviation.
yeah,
There
yeah,
won't be. There will be. It'll be aviation. We'll all be playing in the same
yeah,
pond,
yeah.
right? So it is a good point. We'll probably have to change the name of the cluster at that point, I guess. So, problems for another day. Problems for another
Yeah,
day.
yeah. That's
All right,
awesome. Well,
Kinsley.
thank
Well, it's great. It's great to have you on, man. I appreciate it.
well, thank you so much, and I look forward to getting to know anybody and everybody who's listening. And I'll see you around the email box and the meetings. And look forward to talking to you soon.
If you'd like to be a part of the UAS Cluster Initiative community and get access to more of our content, check us out at www.uascluster.com.